Hello, and welcome to It's a Tragedy. Sorry, it had an exclamation point. I had to. It's a Tragedy, a brief introduction to dramatic tragedy. As we're reading Oedipus, it's important to understand the genre that it fits mostly within. This idea of dramatic tragedy. And so this video is going to give you just a brief introduction to what that term means. It's not necessarily how you've been thinking of the word tragedy up until now. So let's start with some basic terms of the genre, terms that we will be using. First is the word tragedy. Now, of course, I expect you know this word already. You might say, oh, that's such a tragedy, or oh, it's so tragic that that happened. And we tend to think of it as something that's not just sad, but really awful. If it's a tragedy, it's more than just bad. And that applies here to an extent. But when we're thinking of tragedy in this context, we don't just want to think about something as having a sad ending. When we're talking about it in dramatic terms, we're talking about drama that is focused on the downfall of a basically good person, someone that we see as a good person with good morals. But their downfall is through a fatal error or misjudgment on their part. So they do something wrong, they misjudge something, and face a downfall. It often also focuses on a conflict between man and a superior force. Very often that might be fate or the gods. You'd also see a very powerful antagonist, something that is that our hero is outmatched by. And that leads to suffering for them. The conflict and the downfall that comes from it brings them quite a bit of suffering. They tend to lose a lot. And that downfall also leads to, or it was meant to lead to, pity or fear for us. We don't like seeing the downfall of a good person. And when we watch that happen, it wants to inspire pity or fear from us when we're watching it or reading it. Now, the protagonist in a tragedy is known as the tragic hero. Aristotle is known for putting together the best definition of what makes a tragic hero. A tragic hero is a great man of noble stature, somebody we would respect, someone we might want to lead us, somebody who does, with noble stature. We're not just talking about your average good guy. We're talking about someone who is well known and well respected and followed. And then his fall from grace needs to be coming from a great height, and he ends up with nothing. Now, I put nothing in quotes here because it can mean different things for different stories. But essentially, we see them completely stripped of what before might have had them at a lofty place. They are often punished more than what we might think the crime would otherwise merit. It's almost like because they're so good in the beginning, that is what leads them to be even lower than low at the end. This figure is often seen as heroic because he does gain wisdom through this suffering. It is not just that he was a good guy in the beginning, it's that he gains wisdom and maintains honor, even if he's done something quite wrong, in the way he then deals with that downfall. So these are some basic terms to know up front. There's tragedy and then our tragic hero. But there's more than that we need to know. There are some basic parts, and you will see these at work in Oedipus, that are fundamental to a dramatic tragedy. And they're a little tough to pronounce sometimes. This one is hamartia. Hamartia. It's known as your fatal flaw. This trait, this fatal flaw, it might be arrogance, it might be great pride, it might be greed, whatever it may be, the fatal flaw that the hero has is what leads to his downfall. He recognizes the flaw only after it's too late to change things. But it's important here to see that it is not an accident or bad luck that leads to his downfall. There is no innocent victim in these stories. It is because the hero has this fatal flaw that he then makes a bad choice or misses information that he should have seen, and that leads to his downfall. So that's our fatal flaw. We also have peripeteia. Peripeteia. That is the reversal of fortune. It's the period or moment at which it is too late for him to change his situation, usually of his own making. He has pushed it to this point, and now everything's going to start to go downhill. Then we have anagoresis. That is our self-realization, the moment when the protagonist realizes the true nature of what he's done. So everything will start to go poorly. You won't be able to change your situation before he realizes the situation he's put himself in. And that's a big moment because, again, these people are heroic a lot because we see the wisdom they gain along the way. So it can't be that they don't ever see their downfall or they don't ever know that they are to blame. This is the moment when they realize they are to blame. So this moment is crucial to the genre. And finally, we get catharsis. Catharsis is one you might have heard of before. We say that something feels cathartic if, for instance, let's say you're sad about something and you watch a sad movie and you cry. That's cathartic, right? It's like a way to get your emotion out. That's how that stem comes from this idea of catharsis. Catharsis is simply put a feeling of relief or cleansing on behalf of the audience when the story concludes. So this is, again, an important part of the genre because it's not just about what happens in the story. It is about giving that feeling of relief or cleansing to the audience. So even if our hero ends up in a bad place, we have a sense that debts have been paid, that everything is settled. And because we've watched this great fall and now we see it as solved in its own way, even if it's a negative way, we get this sense of feeling of relief and cleansing. That is catharsis. Now, Oedipus is a classic tragedy with a classic tragic hero. So these elements are going to be things you can spot as you were reading the piece. So keep these questions in mind as you begin to read Oedipus. Where can you spot these tragic elements in the play? Make note of where you see we're moving into the downfall or where we get the self-realization. Look for those parts because they are there. Then think also about what similarities you notice between this text and other texts we've studied so far. Do we see, for instance, other periods of time or other styles of detective literature that want that cathartic ending? Do we know of other times or other texts we've read where that fatal flaw of our protagonist is so important to the way the story plays out? Look for those similarities. And finally, ask yourself the question as you are reading, is Oedipus Rex a detective story? And maybe even think of it as, if it were a detective story, what traits make it that? And if it's not, then let's also think about the ways in which it is different. We are seeing this as an early text written long before any of the other texts we've read were even conceived of. So this is a foundational text to a lot of the ways that narrative plays out in a wide variety of genres. So we want to see if we can find connections and then also see the ways in which maybe different cultures and time periods have changed the method, how maybe they've approached things from a very different point of view. Keep these questions in mind as you dive into the text. It can be a tricky text. We have a good translation of it, I think, but it can be a tricky text, so take your time, read it in small bites, and I look forward to talking about it with you more. All right, bye.